Okay, so I already made a video about everything in relation to everything else, but this is such a fundamental way of understanding reality. This is such a fundamental principle we all have to start embodying. Everything exists in relation to everything else. So Ilyenkov provides some helpful analogies to start dialectical analysis using dialectical logic. He, of course, uses the very well-known, at least in the Marxist circles, dichotomy of the capitalist and the worker as being in this unity and struggle of the opposites, both being in this mutually causal relationship. But he provides a different analogy, which I think is pretty easy to understand as well. It is the analogy of the book and the reader. So Ilyenkov suggests that the book and the reader are also in the dialectical opposition. Without the book, there won't be a reader. Without the reader, the book itself is just going to be a form. It's going to just be pieces of paper stuck together with words printed on the paper. But the essence, the nature of the book itself is not going to be fulfilled without the reader. So this, I think, is a great example that helps us understand how to operate within the dialectical pairs. Because some dialectical pairs that are a little bit more abstract, so to speak, they are a little bit easier to grasp in somewhat of a vacuum, right? By just talking, you can kind of understand the relation between the material and the ideal, the relationship between the abstract and the concrete, etc. But when you start looking at many of the other aspects of your life and existence around you, it may become a little bit harder to decipher what is in a dialectical relationship with what exactly. And I think this little analogy with the book and the reader is very helpful. And also the principle of the conditional is going to be pretty helpful. So if you can find something that is conditional to something else, so kind of like the cause and effect, if you are able to find something that wouldn't exist without its other, without its opposition, without its opposite, then you most likely stumbled upon a dialectical pair. Or a dialectical unity, how Ilyenkov calls it, accurately so. So the dialectical unities are all around us, and Ilyenkov insists that we, in our day-to-day lives, actually utilize a lot of these principles, because we all understand the nature of the utensils and the everyday objects in our houses. He says that we all understand a chair and a table, their uses, etc. We understand their essence. Basically, we know what they are done for. We often may be more aware of how they're created, etc., etc. However, he argues that it is in the scientific and the analytical approach that we should be relying very, very heavily on dialectical logic. And in the everyday mundane interactions, Ilyenkov suggests that there are too many little variables that may make this journey a little bit harder. He's not saying it's impossible. He's not saying it's not applicable to your everyday interactions. He's just saying that the analysis of the mundane may come with a little bit more difficulty rather than the more pure scientific investigation. And again, he's talking about this not to encourage or discourage anyone from doing any particular thing. It's just that it is much easier to understand the dialectical relationships in certain areas. This is what I encourage everyone to start doing. Look for these dialectical pairs, not necessarily in your day-to-day lives, but in the relationships of different phenomena, different occurrences, because all of these are the manifestations, so to speak, of the major universal principles. None of them are going to be so unique that you won't be able to fit them into the bigger picture of dialectical materialism, because they're all a part of that substance. One more thing that Ilyenkov mentions in this particular chapter, from which I am reiterating some parts of, the essence of the socio-economic relationships, Ilyenkov argues, is labor, which to any Marxist should be kind of like a given. Duh. So the movement of the social substance, Ilyenkov insists, is labor. It's nothing else, just labor. And Ilyenkov explains why Aristotle, who was able to understand so many of the logical rules and kind of create the premise for dialectics and partially using dialectical methods, why he was not able to distinguish the way that the equation works when you exchange goods that are very, very different from each other. Aristotle, struggled finding this common ground, this common essence between the different objects in his famous house equals that many of those little things, which I can't remember the name of, but I will insert the picture. Ilyenkov explains that Aristotle wasn't able to explain this, not because he was lacking in logic, not because he was lacking in reason, but because he was lacking with the understanding, with the conceptualization of value. And Marx was able to explain what value is, what exchange value is, what the use value is, etc. So this is why it is absolutely crucial to understand what labor is, what value is as use value or as exchange value, in order to understand capitalism, in order to understand commodity production and the way that we are necessarily going to relate to each other during such conditions, during such conditions of production. And all of this is absolutely necessary for organizing efforts, just as I keep on reiterating and repeating, because when we don't understand the essence of what it is we're fighting against, we're not going to be successful. We're going to maybe even seize power, whatever that means nowadays. And then what? This is the thing. The day after some kind of drastic event, what are you going to do? How are you going to start relating to the people in your community differently? And it's not going to be based on your own special morals or your own ability to distinguish right from wrong. Morality has no place in leftist communist organizing. Morality is a question for another day. What you do have to understand is the principles of the movement of the substance, the laws, the universal laws of dialectics that are there. We're not creating anything. We're just observing what is already there to observe, and what kind of conceptualization we can make out of this whole seeming mess of objects and people. These conclusions are going to guide us in our action. These conclusions are going to help us or shoot us in the foot, and this is why it is absolutely necessary to study dialectics. Please let me know what you think. I hope you have a great day today. Solidarity with all the workers of the world in these tumultuous times. Do consider support me on Patreon if you're able to. Of course, take care of yourself and your community first. Subscribe to me on all the other social media accounts, even though I don't do much there, and I'll talk to you sometime later.